The studio lights burned hot, cameras rolling, the crowd hanging on every word. Pete Buttigieg leaned casually toward the microphone, his trademark smile fixed in place. Then, with a smirk sharp enough to cut, he delivered the line. A so-called joke aimed squarely at Representative Jasmine Crockett. The words dripped with condescension. For a split second there was a ripple of laughter, not the full-throated, genuine kind, but the uneasy chuckle of an audience unsure whether to laugh or recoil. The sound faltered almost as quickly as it began, cracking into silence. Nervous smiles froze on faces, eyes darted to the stage, and the air grew heavy with tension. Some gasped, others whispered under their breath. It was the kind of moment where every person knew instinctively something had just gone very, very wrong. The cameras cut to Crockett. She didn't flinch. No smirk, no shake of the head. Her eyes locked steady, her posture unyielding. It was the silence of a woman who had heard worse, endured more, and carried herself through storms far greater than an ill-conceived attempt at humor. The calmness radiating from her stood in stark contrast to the unease gripping the crowd. Buttigieg, still smiling, looked as though he had expected applause. Instead, the weight of the silence bore down, and even his polished composure seemed to flicker. Viewers at home felt it too. The collective inhale before a reckoning. It wasn't just a bad joke, it was a revealing slip, a moment where charm gave way to something sharper, uglier, and in that pause, the stage no longer belonged to him. It shifted, quietly, powerfully, to Crockett. Her expression told the story before she even opened her mouth. A story of resilience. A story of calm that disarms chaos. A story of dignity that makes arrogance look small, and the audience, sensing it, leaned forward in anticipation. They knew the silence wasn't empty. It was loaded, electric, brimming with the reply everyone could feel was coming. But what happened? Next flipped Buttigieg's smooth image upside down and left America buzzing. This wasn't harmless banter. It wasn't just another passing quip on a crowded debate stage. No, this was something deeper, something more dangerous. Because in American politics, words are never just words. They reveal who gets dismissed, who gets taken seriously, and, ultimately, whose voices matter. Pete Buttigieg had long been framed as the golden boy of the Democratic Party. Sharp, eloquent, and endlessly polished, he moved through interviews and debates like a seasoned chess player, always 10 steps ahead. To many in the political establishment, he was untouchable, a media darling who could navigate hostile questions with ease and leave audiences dazzled with clever turns of phrase. His calm intelligence had become his armor, his smile his shield. And that's why this moment landed with such force. Because when Buttigieg turned his carefully honed wit into a weapon, aimed at Jasmine Crockett, it exposed something ugly beneath the polish. What had been celebrated as quickness suddenly looked like arrogance. What had been praised as charm now resembled condescension. For the first time, the Golden Boy's sheen cracked under the spotlight. On the other side of that exchange stood Crockett, young, black, female, a voice forged in the battles of Texas politics where the odds were always stacked against her. She didn't carry the pedigree of the Ivy League or the endorsements of powerful insiders. What she carried was lived experience, the scars of being underestimated, dismissed, and mocked for daring to claim a seat at the table. In Crockett's silence, there was defiance. It was the silence of someone who refused to perform outrage for the cameras, who wouldn't grant her opponent the satisfaction of a flustered response. Instead, she let the weight of the moment hang in the air, daring the audience to see what was really unfolding, a clash not just of two politicians, but of two visions for America. The stakes were no longer about a single remark. They had transformed into something larger, something symbolic. On one side stood Buttigieg, representing the polished insider brand of politics that too often dismissed challengers who didn't fit the mold. On the other stood Crockett, embodying the millions of underestimated voices who knew what it meant to fight for respect in a world eager to deny it. Every gasp from the crowd, every glance exchanged in that room underscored the same truth. This wasn't just about reputation. It was about whether dignity could survive in a political culture that rewards ridicule. It was about whether the calm resolve of an underdog could stand against the ridicule of someone the media had long deemed invincible. And, in that silence, America leaned in. Viewers across the country knew they weren't watching just another soundbite. They were witnessing a test of composure, a test of power, a test of who truly represented the future of political leadership. Buttigieg still didn't see it. He thought the moment belonged to him, that his joke had landed, that his Polish would carry him through yet again. And yet, Buttigieg had no idea he was about to face his calmest and fiercest opponent yet. To understand why Pete Buttigieg's remark carried such weight, you have to trace the arc of his rise, because Buttigieg didn't arrive on that stage as just another politician. He arrived as a symbol, a figure carefully cultivated into one of the brightest stars of the Democratic Party. From the very beginning, Buttigieg's resume read like the blueprint of a golden boy, a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, a veteran of the war in Afghanistan, the mayor of a Midwestern city, South Bend, Indiana, who positioned himself as the bridge between coastal elites and heartland voters. He embodied ambition wrapped in intellect, and the media took notice quickly. His biography was irresistible. The small-town mayor with global credentials and military grit, ready to prove that youth and brilliance could reshape American politics. When he entered the 2020 presidential race, he was virtually unknown nationally. Yet, almost overnight, he became a media sensation. Buttigieg's debate performances were polished, disciplined, and precise. While others stumbled over attacks or scrambled for applause lines, he delivered crisp, memorable soundbites that traveled instantly across social media. He was the kind of candidate journalists loved to cover, articulate, thoughtful, and seemingly unflappable. And it worked. For months, Buttigieg stood toe-to-toe with seasoned senators and governors, often emerging as the one who seemed most in control. His quick wit turned sharp questions into opportunities for viral moments. His answers sounded less like off-the-cuff remarks and more like perfectly engineered phrases designed to withstand scrutiny. Even when his rivals accused him of inexperience, he managed to spin that weakness into a strength, arguing that freshness was what politics desperately needed. But with that polish came a reputation. Behind the admiration for his intellect, critics began to notice a different side: glibness. Buttigieg had a knack for skating over uncomfortable realities with technocratic language. When pressed on race, policing, or inequality, he often defaulted to data-driven talking points rather than visceral empathy. His sharpness, once celebrated as brilliance, at times began to resemble dismissal. To some, it wasn't leadership. It was clever deflection dressed in eloquence. Still, the image held. Even after bowing out of the presidential race, Buttigieg's brand remained intact. Joe Biden rewarded him with a cabinet post, Secretary of Transportation. And once again, he thrived. Cable news booked him endlessly. He spoke fluently about infrastructure, supply chains, airline crises, always with that same polished calm. He was a communicator's communicator, a master of turning policy into digestible one-liners. For his supporters, this was exactly the kind of intelligence and poise they wanted in politics. For his critics, it was evidence of someone who knew how to talk, but not necessarily how to listen. And yet, time and again, he proved nearly impossible to beat in verbal sparring. He disarmed hostile interviewers. He diffused tough questions with ease. He left conservative pundits flustered, unable to keep up with his quick responses. That reputation became part of his armor, To go up against Buttigieg in a debate was to enter a contest where he always seemed to hold the upper hand. His military service added gravitas. His Rhodes Scholarship added brilliance. His mayorship added heartland relatability. He was the kind of opponent who left adversaries grasping for words while he leaned on polish and precision. But here's the paradox of invincibility. It can make you careless. Over time, confidence hardens into something sharper. The sharpness turns into arrogance, and arrogance, once unmasked, is impossible to hide. Because what Buttigieg didn't anticipate on that night wasn't just Crockett's resilience. It was the reality that his very strength, his wit, his cleverness, his polished delivery, could also become his greatest weakness. When used against someone who had fought her way through skepticism and dismissal all her life, his glibness didn't look like brilliance anymore. It looked like the very thing Crockett's supporters despised, a smug dismissal of voices that power too often ignores. This was the Achilles heel of the Golden Boy. For years, his reputation as the smartest person in the room had shielded him from deeper scrutiny. But on this stage, in this moment, the very armor that once made him untouchable began to crack, because even the sharpest political tacticians stumble when arrogance blinds them. To truly understand why Jasmine Crockett stood so steady in that moment, you have to know the road that carried her there. Because Crockett wasn't shaped in the quiet comfort of privilege or polished by Ivy League boardrooms. She was forged in the fire of being doubted, dismissed, and underestimated at every turn, and rising stronger each time. Her journey began not in the glittering spotlight of Washington, but in the grind of classrooms and community meetings. After finishing law school, Crockett didn't chase corporate prestige. She went straight into the trenches, defending clients who couldn't afford the kind of justice wealth buys. Her career wasn't built on photo ops, it was built on showing up for those America too often leaves behind. As a civil rights attorney, she confronted injustice face to face, case by case, family by family. Every courtroom battle deepened her conviction that the system wasn't broken by accident. It was built that way, and that conviction became the foundation of her political fire. But law was just the beginning. Crockett's energy spilled into organizing, into grassroots work that demanded more than clever slogans. She listened. She marched. She fought alongside neighbors and activists who had seen promises come and go but rarely seen power move in their favor. And when people asked who would carry their fight into the halls of government, she answered with her own candidacy. Texas politics was never going to make it easy for someone like her, a young black woman who didn't sugarcoat her words, who called out hypocrisy with the same clarity she brought to her legal arguments. Opponents thought they could box her in, dismiss her as too radical, too loud, or simply not her time. But every time, she flipped those labels back onto the people who tried to use them. Her victories weren't just political, they were symbolic. They told every underestimated voice, your fire belongs in the fight. By the time Crockett reached Congress, her reputation was set. She was outspoken, yes, but more importantly, she was unafraid. Unafraid of the glares from colleagues who wanted her to tone it down. Unafraid of the attacks from those who thought respectability meant silence. She was never reckless. She was precise. She wielded words like a scalpel, slicing through hypocrisy until even her harshest critics had to admit she didn't miss. And yet, what made Crockett more than just another sharp debater was the weight she carried into every exchange. She represented the millions who had been told to wait their turn, to bite their tongue, to smile politely while others talked over them. She embodied those who had been laughed at, mocked, or dismissed for daring to speak truth in spaces that weren't built to hear them. She was their voice, not because she claimed it, but because she lived it. Every time someone underestimated her, she turned it into fuel. And every time an opponent thought they could silence her, they learned the same lesson. Underestimating Jasmine Crockett was a mistake you only made once. So when Pete Buttigieg cracked his clever little joke on that stage, It wasn't the first time Crockett had heard a polished man try to reduce her to a punchline. It wasn't the first time someone tried to turn her presence into entertainment rather than respect. She had lived that moment 1,000 times before, in classrooms, in courtrooms, in committee hearings, and every time she had found a way to turn the script around. The difference this time was the audience. This wasn't just a local chamber or a courtroom gallery. This was millions watching in real time, waiting to see whether Crockett would shrink under the glare of BUTTIGIEG'S practiced charm, or whether she would rise. And here's the truth. Crockett didn't need to raise her voice to make her point. She didn't need to match volume with volume, sarcasm with sarcasm. Her power came from calm, from the unshakable knowledge that she had faced worse and emerged stronger. She stood not just as a congresswoman, but as a living rebuke to the idea that dignity and ferocity cannot live in the same person. Her story was one of defiance, yes, but also of belonging. She belonged on that stage. She belonged in that fight. And she belonged in the long line of underestimated Americans who proved that respect isn't granted by gatekeepers. It's seized by those who refuse to bow. And so, as BUTTIGIEG's smirk spread across his face after his joke, the cameras caught Crockett's expression, steady, composed, almost surgical in its focus, because she had been here before, and she knew how it would end. And on that stage, her precision would turn BUTTIGIEG's smirk into silence. The moment could have faded. BUTTIGIEG could have let his joke linger and dissolve into the noise of the debate. But that wasn't his style. He wasn't used to silence, wasn't used to letting a line hang unpolished. So, instead of moving on, he doubled down. He leaned forward, tilted his head just so, and offered another quip. This one more pointed, more smug, wrapped in that rehearsed cadence that made cable news anchors nod along and say, "Now that's quick wit." The audience's response was fractured. A handful of nervous chuckles bubbled up from the front row, the kind that sound more like reflex than amusement. Others stayed silent, lips pressed, eyes darting from BUTTIGIEG to Crockett, to the moderators. Somewhere in the middle rows a few whispers started. Did he really just go there? The tension wasn't dissipating. It was curdling. BUTTIGIEG, though, seemed to take the scattered laughter as validation. He straightened in his chair, the smirk widening, and added a flourish. "See, Congresswoman, this is why the art of debate is, well, an art." He let the words dangle, proud of their sharpness. For years, this was how he won rooms, a combination of intellect, timing, and a touch of condescension that passed as charm when directed at political opponents. But this time, something was off. The air didn't crackle with admiration. It thickened with unease. And then there was Jasmine Crockett. She didn't flinch. She didn't frown. She didn't even glance away. Instead, she fixed her eyes on BUTTIGIEG, her posture steady, her face unreadable. It was a calm so deliberate that it pulled the oxygen out of the room. Every second she stayed silent, the crowd leaned in further, waiting for the explosion that never came. That silence wasn't weakness. It was power. And everyone in that hall began to feel it. The moderators shifted in their seats, unsure whether to intervene or to let the moment breathe. The cameras zoomed tighter, catching the faint twitch at the corner of BUTTIGIEG's smile. For the first time all night, his confidence looked rehearsed, not natural. He chuckled at his own wit again, but now it echoed hollowly against the silence, surrounding Crockett. The tension stretched like a taut wire, and in that stillness, something happened. The audience's allegiance began to drift. They weren't laughing with BUTTIGIEG anymore. They were watching Crockett, wondering, waiting, and Crockett knew it. She let the silence ride, her gaze steady, as though measuring him, as though weighing the exact moment when precision would land harder than volume ever could. It was a master class in restraint. Every beat of quiet amplified the stakes. Every Second, Buttigieg tried to reassert control, only reminded viewers that he was grasping for it. The once unshakable golden boy of Democratic politics suddenly looked like a man tap dancing on thin ice. Then a murmur rippled through the audience. Faint at first, then louder. People shifting in their seats, leaning forward, bracing. They knew the balance had shifted. Buttigieg's cleverness was no longer charming. It was desperate. And Crockett, still silent, still steady, was letting him dig his own hole deeper. The debate had ceased to be about policies or points. It had become a test of composure, of strength, of who controlled the room. And right there, without saying a word, Crockett had claimed it. Buttigieg tried once more, grasping at levity. "Well, I suppose I should tread carefully, or the Congresswoman might teach me a thing or two." He chuckled, but it landed flat. The hall didn't laugh. It groaned, and in that instant, everyone understood the stakes had shifted. This was no longer about one line in a debate. It was about who held the dignity to withstand mockery, and who was shrinking beneath the weight of their own arrogance. The wire couldn't stretch any tighter. The silence couldn't hold any longer. The cameras, the audience, the nation, all leaned in, and then, with millions watching, Crockett struck. The silence was unbearable, at least for Buttigieg. He shifted in his seat, his smile rigid now, as if he could will the audience back into laughter. But Crockett didn't rush. She let the moment simmer, let the anticipation swell until every eye in the room belonged to her. Then, in a voice steady as stone, she began. "Secretary Buttigieg," she said, her tone calm, almost gentle. "I've been laughed at before. I've been dismissed before. But here's the thing. Every time someone thought a joke was enough to erase the work I've done, they were proven wrong." The audience leaned in. Her words weren't sharp jabs, they were scalpel cuts, precise, deliberate. "I'm not here because of sound bites. I'm here because I went to law school, because I fought for people in courtrooms who had no one else to stand with them. I'm here because I took on cases that weren't glamorous, weren't profitable, but were just. And I won." A ripple of applause broke out, quick, spontaneous. Crockett paused, let it happen, then continued with the same measured force. In Texas, I organized with communities that the political class had written off. I sat in living rooms with single mothers who worked 2 jobs just to pay rent. I fought alongside families who couldn't afford a lobbyist in Washington, but still deserved a voice. That's why I'm here. Not because I learned to polish a clever line, but because people trusted me to fight for them. Gasps, then nods, then a growing murmur of approval. Buttigieg shifted again, his smirk flickering like a candle in the wind. Crockett let the pause return. Then she leaned in, eyes locked on him. "So, when you joke at my expense, what you're really saying is that those people I represent, those mothers, those families, don't matter. You're telling them that their struggles are just setups for your punchline." The crowd's reaction was visceral. A wave of oohs rolled through the hall, followed by scattered applause that quickly swelled into a rhythm of claps. The moderators exchanged glances. No one dared cut her off. Crockett pressed forward, her words growing sharper but never losing composure. "See, you've built a career out of being the smartest man in the room. A Rhodes Scholar, a veteran, a mayor, a secretary. And yes, that resume shines. But here's the thing. When your cleverness turns into condescension, it stops being brilliance. It starts being arrogance." Buttigieg's smile collapsed into a flat line. He opened his mouth as if to interject, but the crowd drowned him out with more applause. Crockett didn't even glance at him. She had the room, and she knew it. "And that," she continued, her voice rising just enough to command, "is the difference between you and me. You see politics as performance. I see it as survival. You look for the perfect soundbite. I look for the single mom who needs her rent paid, the young man who needs his record cleared, the veteran who needs a roof over his head. That's why I don't flinch when you joke, because I don't answer to laughs. I answer to lives. The room erupted. This wasn't polite applause anymore. It was thunder. People stood to clap, to cheer, to nod furiously in agreement. Cameras flashed across the stage, catching Buttigieg's tightened jaw, his fingertips tapping nervously against the desk. Crockett waited again. The silence returned, not empty this time, but electric. She let the crowd settle, then delivered the blow that twisted the knife. So, go ahead. Make your jokes. Rehearse your lines. Remind America how quick you are with words. But I'll remind America that being quick with words isn't the same as being grounded in truth. And truth, Secretary Buttigieg, is undefeated. The gasp was immediate, followed by a roar of clapping and whistles. The moderators tried to restore order, but the wave of energy had overtaken the hall. The cameras zoomed in on Buttigieg, his lips pressed, his eyes darting down, his legendary composure visibly cracking. Crockett leaned back, serene, unbothered, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She didn't need to gloat. The silence of her confidence did the gloating for her. And then she added, softly but powerfully, the line that sealed the moment. You call it art, Secretary. I call it service, and service will always outlast spin. The audience exploded. Some stood, on their feet, clapping until their hands reddened. Others cheered with the fervor of a sports arena. The moderators looked helpless, caught between debate decorum and the reality of witnessing a viral moment in the making. Buttigieg, usually the man of cool intellect, sat frozen in the spotlight. The smirk was gone. His shoulders were taut, and, for the first time that night, he wasn't the center of the conversation. Crockett was. The escalation was complete. Each line had dismantled the polished image he had spent years cultivating, piece by piece until what was left wasn't a golden boy but a politician exposed. Crockett hadn't raised her voice, hadn't sneered, hadn't mocked. She had simply turned his own weapon, wit, into a mirror reflecting arrogance back at him, and the crowd had chosen their victor. That night, Buttigieg's cleverness had met its match, not in louder insults, not in sharper quips, but in something rarer, harder, more enduring. Dignity. The cameras panned out, capturing the electricity in the hall. The mix of awe and disbelief etched across faces. The moderators shuffled their papers, knowing the debate had shifted in ways no rulebook could account for. And somewhere, across living rooms and news feeds in America, millions of viewers were already replaying the clip in their minds. Crockett sat, calm as ever, as if the storm hadn't just broken around her. But the real shock wasn't in what she said, it was in how America responded. Within minutes of Crockett's words landing like thunder, the debate was no longer just a stage event. It was a cultural earthquake. Phones lit up across the country as the clip was clipped, shared, remixed, and launched into the bloodstream of the internet. By the time the moderators even moved on to the next question, hashtags were already climbing the ranks. Crockett, clapback, Buttigieg backfire, mic drop moment. On TikTok, the moment was set to music. Slow zooms on Buttigieg's faltering smile, freeze frames on Crockett's steady eyes, captions reading, "This is what dignity looks like." Within hours, there were millions of views, then tens of millions. Teenagers were recreating the exchange, activists were dissecting each pause and emphasis, comedians were dubbing it the clapback of the year. Over on X, the platform burned with hot takes. One post read, "Pete's smirk evaporated in real time." Crockett didn't just win, she exposed. Another went viral with just 4 words. Respect beats ridicule, always. The likes and retweets piled up so fast that Crockett's name trended for days. On YouTube, full breakdowns appeared almost instantly. Political commentators who had once praised Buttigieg's cool intellect now admitted that this night was different. Crockett owned that stage, one analyst declared in a live stream. She didn't just counter a joke, she shifted the power dynamic, forever. Celebrities chimed in too. A-list actors, recording artists, and best-selling authors shared the clip with captions like, This is leadership." One late-night host dubbed it the single greatest debate comeback of the decade, replaying the clip in slow motion, to the roar of his studio audience. Meanwhile, Buttigieg's camp scrambled. Aides rushed out statements insisting the joke was misunderstood and taken out of context. Surrogates appeared on cable news, trying to downplay Crockett's takedown as overhyped, but the internet was merciless. Every attempt at spin looked weaker compared to the raw, unfiltered footage that had already captured the world's attention. It didn't matter what Buttigieg's team said, the narrative had been set. The story wasn't about whether a line was clever. It was about how arrogance had met its match and how composure had claimed the victory. Buttigieg, once untouchable in the arena of verbal jousting, suddenly looked smaller. Crockett, once underestimated, now stood taller than ever. For many, Crockett became more than just a politician that night. She became a symbol. A symbol for every woman who'd been interrupted at a meeting, every black leader who'd been underestimated, every young voice told to wait their turn. She didn't just clap back for herself. She spoke for millions. One viral comment captured the feeling perfectly. Crockett didn't just win an argument. She showed us what power looks like when it refuses to be mocked. The shockwaves were felt beyond the internet. Editorial boards weighed in, op-eds declared a shift in the democratic landscape, and grassroots groups began sharing Crockett's words at rallies. Her composure became a rallying cry, proof that truth delivered with dignity could break through even the slickest of sound bites. Even Buttigieg's allies, though quiet in public, whispered unease behind the scenes. They knew this wasn't just a bad night. This was a reputational crack, and cracks, once visible, have a way of spreading. And as Crockett's star rose, something bigger was happening. Young people who had never watched a debate clip in their lives were sending her words to group chats. Immigrant families who had long felt invisible were saying, "She spoke for us." Communities tired of being laughed at, dismissed, or tokenized suddenly saw themselves reflected in her calm refusal to bow to ridicule. The moment had transcended politics. It was no longer about Buttigieg's joke or Crockett's reply. It was about respect. It was about dignity. It was about who gets to stand on a stage in America and be heard without being reduced to a punchline. And so, as hashtags continued to trend, as late-night jokes turned the golden boy into the butt of his own gag, and as Crockett's calm expression became a meme of empowerment, the deeper story remained. Because beyond the laughter, the memes, the headlines, something more powerful lingered. A lesson, a reckoning, and yet, beyond the memes and headlines, the deeper lesson still lingered. In the end, Crockett's win was never about her alone. It was not just one woman's sharp reply to one man's careless joke. It was a reminder, etched into millions of screens, that dignity will always outlast mockery, that truth will always outshine a soundbite, and that calm, steady courage can dismantle even the most polished arrogance. The replayed moment became more than a viral clip. It was a parable in real time, a story America needed to see. Because what Crockett showed was that politics doesn't belong to those who joke the loudest or smile the slickest. It belongs to those who carry the weight of communities, histories, and voices long underestimated. For generations, voices like hers, young, black, female, outspoken, have been pushed to the margins, told to wait their turn, laughed at, or silenced. And yet, again and again, those very voices have risen to define the future of the country. Crockett's calm clapback, fit into that longer arc, a testament that the underestimated are often the ones holding the deepest truths. Her poise that night reminded America of something it often forgets. Strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes strength is in the refusal to flinch, the steady gaze that doesn't break, the words delivered without anger but with unshakable certainty. That kind of strength has carried movements, reshaped laws, and redefined what leadership looks like. And for viewers who saw themselves in her, whether immigrants who've endured the sting of ridicule, workers dismissed by the powerful, or young leaders fighting to be heard, her moment was more than entertainment. It was validation. It was proof that when you stand in your truth, you cannot be mocked into silence. The deeper reflection was this: America's greatest strength has never been its polished elites, its golden boys with perfect resumes and clever quips. Its strength has always been the underestimated, the people who rise when the world least expects it, who turn insults into catalysts, who transform ridicule into resolve. From abolitionists to suffragettes, from civil rights leaders to new generations of changemakers, the arc of progress has always bent because of those who refused to laugh along when dignity was on the line. And so Crockett's reply was more than just a counterpunch. It was a vision of a new politics, one where leadership is measured not by glibness, but by grounding, not by the ability to score points, but by the ability to stand firm, not by polish, but by principle. That is why the clip spread like fire, because beneath the spectacle, it gave people a glimpse of what they yearned for: politics where dignity triumphs over derision, where respect is stronger than ridicule, and where truth is not a weapon but a beacon. The moment may have been fleeting on stage, but its resonance endures. And perhaps that is the real lesson. In an age of noise and spectacle, what lingers is not the cleverest joke, but the clearest truth. And on that night, in front of millions, Jasmine Crockett showed America that truth still has a voice, and it cannot be mocked away. From the moment Pete Buttigieg's smug joke left his lips to the instant Jasmine Crockett's calm, razor-sharp reply went viral, America witnessed a story larger than a single debate. It was the story of what happens when arrogance collides with authenticity, when cleverness meets conviction. Buttigieg's smirk was meant to dismiss, to reduce Crockett to a punchline. Instead, it became the spark for her rise. Because when the laughter died down and the crowd leaned in, it wasn't his wit that held the room. It was her composure, her dignity, her refusal to let anyone, no matter how polished, define her worth. That is the truth of this viral moment. Mockery fades, but justice endures. Sound bites echo and vanish, but authenticity plants roots. Crockett's triumph wasn't only about winning an exchange, it was about proving that when the underestimated find their voice, even the most celebrated can falter. And for everyone watching, the lesson was clear. In an age of spin and spectacle, the real strength belongs to those who don't flinch, who stand steady, and who let truth, not noise, carry the day. This is the power of these moments, and it's why they matter. Because they remind us that America's future will not be built by those who mock, but by those who stand. And if you're ready for more epic political takedowns, more viral confrontations, more stories that prove dignity always beats derision, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to State Shock today, and never miss the moments that show, again and again, that truth always finds its voice.